Well, thank you all very much for coming. Lovely to see lots of familiar faces. So thank you all for joining us for the Lost Wells of Galloway, one of our Can You Dig It events, but also excitingly a launch event for an online research project that we're starting, which we're hoping that a few of you will join us in at the end of this. So my name's Helen Kerran. I'm the Education and Community Engagement Officer for the Galloway Glens. Joining us today, we've got Claire Williamson, who's the Senior Archaeologist for Rathmell Archaeology and delivering the Can You Dig It project for us, and Dr. Peter Hewitt of the Dumfries and Galloway Museum Service. So thanks very much to Claire and Peter for joining us today. I really appreciate it. We've also got Catch Holmes, a creative producer from Cast Fair. She'll be popping in at the end just to talk a little bit about another exciting aspect of the project. For those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do know, I apologise, the Galloway Glens is a landscape partnership project, which means it's a suite of projects all funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund in order to connect the people of the Galloway Glens with their natural, cultural and built heritage. It's running from 2018 to 2022, so we're heading terrifyingly close into the end of the third year. And it's based in southwest Scotland, very rural southwest Scotland. It follows the catchments of the rivers Ken and Dee from the sort of uplands behind Carsfairn, running down through the Glen Kens villages, past beautiful Loch Ken, past the market town of Castle Douglas and out to the sea at Kirkcudbright. So that's our area. As I say, it's a suite of projects all being run in partnership with different people, and of those 35 projects, Can You Dig It is our community archaeology project, one of our bigger projects. It's match funded by Historic Environment Scotland, so we're very appreciative of their support and the National Lottery's support in allowing us to put on all these events for free for you. Can You Dig It's been running since 2019. We had a great year in 2019 of digs and explorations around the Galloway Glens area, and then of course in 2020 we had to change, so some of you will have been on our programme of our lecture series of Can You Dig It through 2020. If you missed any of those, they're up on the Galloway Glens YouTube channel. Just search YouTube for Galloway Glens and you'll see all the recordings of our previous talks there. And we're continuing that into 2021, unfortunately, although we're very much hoping to get back to on the ground activity in the spring and summer and autumn. So this is a bit different in that I'm expecting it to be a great talk by Peter, but also I think that we're trying to inspire you to join us a little bit afterwards and join us in an online research project into the Lost Wells of Galloway. So after Peter's talked us through some wells that we already know some things about, Claire's going to talk us through the techniques and the process that you would go through to take a blank map square and really find out the details of the pools and the wells and the springs that are hidden in there. Can't wait to find out all about the stories behind it. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Peter for his talk. Peter is the Museums Officer for Collections for Kirkcudbrightshire and Wigtonshire, and he's also the founder of the Folklore Museums Network. So over to you, Peter.
I also want to sort of suggest some reasons why these wells have been lost, why they've disappeared from our sort of collective memory, and why we need to find them again. And then we'll have some questions, and as Helen said, go over to Claire, who'll explore the sort of the well hunting process, which I have to say is, for me anyway, really addictive. So why wells, I guess? So why are wells significant? Well, I think we can all understand the sort of the functional and physical need for water, and that's of course amply provided for us by great water companies, piped into our homes and so on. But it's more difficult for us to fully appreciate the pressing need experienced by early human beings to find fresh sources of water and the significance of finding that water and the significance that had for them. Water is a central element of establishing a community and a civilization. And going back to earliest times, certainly recent works on like evolutionary anthropology have said this, that the spread of Homo sapiens across the globe was driven by the search for water. And it's also been said that those water sources also became some of the earliest sacred sites. Indeed, you think about the River Dee that flows through the Glen Kens in the first slide, if you don't mind, Claire. The name itself, the River Dee, is derived from Ptolemy's geography. I'm not going to try and pronounce these names, but essentially referring to a goddess, and that kind of finds its way into lots and lots of Celtic river names, sort of a relationship between water, sacred, the divine, and often the feminine divine too. So this idea has a long pedigree. Watery places were probably then the first places where people apprehended or sought to access the supernatural. Long before, perhaps, again, this is the sort of the movement of research on this, long before perhaps other topographic features like mountains or trees, rocks, and caves and so on. So over time, springs and water sources were considered above or superior other sorts of springs that were used for just washing and drinking and so on. And these became guarded by taboos, rituals, rites, and some societies, it seems from the archaeology, they thought they were places where you could access another world, or the other world, or the realm of ancestors, or the realm beyond life. During the Bronze Age in Europe, freshwater locations such as Carlingwood Loch, which is the next slide, this was a body of water that received bronze artifacts, probably deposited there as offerings to deities. And in the Iron Age to early medieval period, there's increasing evidence that Pictish sites, which are mainly in the north of Scotland, but also some in later periods in Dumfries and Galloway too, such as the one in the next slide, there's evidence that these sites were places where water played a part in ceremonial and ritual affairs. So the black and white photo there is actually a fairly recent excavation of Trustees Hill in Anworth, and they discovered a rock-cut basin, which was at the entrance to a sort of a ramparted fort, and it was thought that it was a basin that filled with water, and there was somehow some sort of ceremonial use to sort of to go with the entrance to the fort, which is interesting. And archaeology is pumping out all kinds of new examples to make us think about wells and sites in new ways. Christianity, of course, hugely significant relationship with water. Maintains the idea from earlier religions that water is a purifier, and many churches in the region, like the next one in the slide, are explicitly connected to springs and wells. In fact, most churches founded around 800 or so have some sort of water body nearby. It's just an integral part of the ritual life of that religious community. So my focus is really going to be on, I guess, wells that have been sort of endowed with special cultural significance. So supernormal wells, if you like, but sort of, I'm going to be talking a lot about ritual and stuff like that. But as Claire will get into later, the named wells of the region, wells that is without any known religious or supernatural associations, these wells are just as important, if not more important, because they're about everyday life as well. They're about the development of Galloway communities, agriculture, industry, leisure, meeting places. They're about people. And so hopefully when you all kind of take part in this project, you'll come across these named wells and you'll see that these are really, really important as well. So just sort of thinking about typologies of wells then. What is a holy well? To begin with, well, generally speaking, all wells relate to springs which issue from the Earth's surface. There are exceptions. They may come come up from sort of aquifers deep below the ground, or they may be surface water flushes. There's lots of different varieties. Holy well or sacred spring is really so called because it's a focus of ritual practice and engagement with other spiritual beings, saints, gods, whatever. And sometimes those wells are adorned with structures. So the next slide shows a well that's fairly near me in a place called Bridekirk, just outside of Annan, and that's in a beautiful escarpment near the river Annan. It issues from a cleft of rock and runs into this wonderful basin. It's faced with stone, and it issues into a basin which is probably the 15th or 16th century, and possibly taken from the church that are now ruined nearby. Holy wells are often perceived to be healing sites too, where offerings might be left. So they may be dedicated to gods, saints, or they're considered to be the abodes, as I mentioned before, of ancestors, genius loci, spirits of place. And these genius loci may take a number of forms, like fish or reptiles, fairies even. So the water and the place where the water comes from, where it emerges out of the ground, is seen as special, set apart, sacred. The next slide shows probably the best preserved well in Dumfries and Galloway, which is St. Querin's well. This is such a great well because today images of loved ones can be found there. So you'll go there and you'll find contemporary offerings left by people, perhaps as memorials, perhaps as a means of communication with these people after death, perhaps just as you know, as I say, like a memorial to someone that you love. It's also a place where any type of material object can be left as a kind of wish fulfillment. So going back to the 19th century, they found loads of coins in here. Some of them dated back to the 16th century, suggesting a kind of a fairly buoyant pilgrimage culture surrounding this well. And it's also still in use as a Clootie well. So a healing well, a place where pieces of clothing and material are left at the well, hung on trees, usually. And as the material wastes away, so does the ailment or disease associated with that piece of clothing. And I've seen on Twitter recently that quite a few people are leaving face masks at this well now. So, you know, a really interesting modern contemporary development. This well is just outside of Dumfries, for people who are asking. So holy wells then are places where water naturally or artificially gathers, and it needn't just be a spring coming out of the ground. It could be a rock crevice, a natural basin, a pond, a seepage pool, a cavity in a tree, anywhere really that is then endowed with spiritual significance by communities who use it. One of the best examples of this is the next slide. It's probably one of my favorite wells ever. This is Chapel Wells. And it's actually keep forgetting this sort of slide there. So yeah, a nice little bauble with a doggy on there. There you go. So this is just an amazing well. It's actually a series of wells, 3 wells. Just make it out on the left-hand side. You have to sort of scramble down a cliff to get there. It's a place where it's a place that's kind of associated with this really shadowy figure of a female saint called St. Medan, or St. Madana, a saint whose legend is probably rooted in pre-Christian literature of Ireland. But as you can see, it's a natural basin, which is topped up by the tide. So this is a saltwater well. And in the 19th century, and probably long before that, this was a place where locals brought their sickly children and sort of dunked them wholesale into the large pool by the ankle. and it was a way of curing them from various diseases. And they also bathed in a couple of little apertures to the side of there too. So holy wells really are, I guess, places of heightened cultural significance, places where people gather, places that have been revered, treasured, worshipped, and of course used. I mean, they're places essentially of human existence and culture, and places where people's fears, concerns, desires, and hopes are all kind of materialized somehow, in the landscape itself and in the stories surrounding them, and they're still visible in the landscape. And it's that sense of experience of that, soaking up the atmosphere of these places, which is just so important. And it's something that I hope that you, participating in this project, finding these wells out for yourself, will experience. Now, I have to warn you that possibly some of the wells you might be looking for might not be as impressive as this, but maybe they will be. Who knows? This is the whole point of the project, and it's just so exciting that we might find some new things. So, so the next slide is a really exciting well in the Galloway Glens region, at the very top of the region at Carstfen, sometimes called the Lagwine Well or the Green Well of Scotland. That's what it's known as on maps today. Just in terms of its sort of visual appearance, its size, location, and the sort of associated lore with it, it's just incredible. So it's nearly it's about 30 feet, I think, in circumference, and about 20 feet deep, although some people say it's bottomless. And it was used by locals to cure a number of diseases, but mainly scurvy. So sort of, if you're lacking vitamin C in your diet, you would go to this well. And really, it's got everything that a folklorist could ever want. It's got treasure legends. So one of them is that Covenanters, sort of pretty extreme Protestants in parts of southwest Scotland, threw their gold into the Green Well whilst being pursued by a particular hunter of Covenanters, Grierson of Larg. And the folkloric imagination, I think, nearly always comes up with treasure stories. It comes up with curses or prohibitions or taboos. So there's a grassy recess near this well, and it's called the Devil's Seat, apparently. And the devil himself is said to guard the treasure of the well. Lightning is said to strike the person who sits in that seat. And if the treasure hunter finds the treasure in there, then he will bring it down, if you like, a kind of curse on himself and his family. Another legend associated with this is that the depths conceal treasure or gold from the nearby Lagwine Castle, which itself burnt down, we think accidentally, in 1762. However, there are some legends that suggest that there was supernatural intervention. James McAdam, the owner of the castle, according to legend, was in the well fishing out his treasure when his house burnt down, so serve him right, sort of thing. Now, there's another account that the well, and this is a really interesting one, and it just kind of like shows the variety of stories surrounding like a single place. It's just amazing. There's another account that this well contains the coining equipment of an alchemist, someone called Dr. Dodds, and possibly there might be a way of kind of verifying this story historically. Apparently, he was tried in Edinburgh for coining, for making coins out of locally found gold from the gold wells, which are just a few, well, maybe under a mile away from here, the gold wells of Cairnsmore. And that's the next slide, just to give you a sense of what we're looking at there on the maps. So that's just sort of at the base of Cairnsmore. Apparently, he wanted to convert the gold dust that he found at the gold wells into coinage that he could use in West India, in the West Indies. So again, you get a sense of the timeline, possibly, that he was maybe involved in the slave trade or smuggling or something like that. So these stories I'm sure they have their roots in some sort of local law, which just makes them just incredibly interesting. So I think later on Claire's going to go into a bit more detail about the two particular wells, but I wanted to mention these because they're healing wells, and they leave a kind of resonance and a kind of an echo of a ritual practice, which is actually quite an important part of water-based cults or cultic practice associated with water-based sites. So the next slide shows an OS map with two, I think, interconnected wells. The Rumbling Well, these are just to the east of Dalbeattie and near Bittle. And the Rumbling Well is something that you can access and go there. It's, as you can see, it's marked on the map there. And the other blue arrow shows Bittle Slot, where there's another well called the Slot Well. Now, the Rumbling Well was frequented by sick people, usually on the first Sunday of May. And an especially interesting aspect of this is that they would lie by the well on the Saturday night and spend the night there. And then in the next morning, they would drink from the well in the hope of a cure. Now, the idea of sleeping near a well is reminiscent of both early Christian miraculous cures, often for sort of mental illnesses like madness or various other forms of mental illness that probably were misdiagnosed. And the next slide shows this incredible place, not in Dumfries and Galloway, sadly, but St. Fillan's Pool. And I just want to tell you a little bit about this because it's so interesting. Now, this was a holy or healing pool for curing insane people. And it was once divided by a stone dike, and that created male and female bathing areas. Now, individuals were encouraged to dive into the bottom of the pool, which isn't particularly deep, but it's deeper in some places, pick up stones, and then take the stones out and circle around a cairn and then place the stones on top of the cairn. And then they were stripped naked and led to the nearby church, where they were tied to the altar. In some accounts, they were tied to a straw-covered plinth, or to St. Fillan's tomb, which was in the church. And this bell was suspended either on their chest or over their head, and they would spend the night at the church. And amazingly, if they had broken free by the morning, then they were heading for a cure. Otherwise, they would have to do it all again. So, an interesting approach in Stirling. And of course, this is also kind of vaguely reminiscent of much earlier Greek and Roman temple enclosures where pilgrims would sleep near sometimes open wells or similar sorts of areas and hope to receive oracular messages from the presiding deity of that place. So there's a really interesting echo of this sort of stuff. And this is another amazing thing really about the kind of material that you're hopefully going to be researching, is that wells and water places associated with water, they have this knack of carrying tradition. And I'm not suggesting that there's a continuous tradition in the Rumbling Well, that it's a kind of an oracular well. But nevertheless, fragments of belief and aspects of human behavior, they kind of coagulate around sacred water sites. And there's lots of parallels across time and space. So it's just a really rewarding subject to get into. The next slide is just briefly a note on the Slot Well. Claire's going to go into this a bit more later. But essentially, it was a healing well for animals, which is significant in itself. And this is a really important, I think, lost well, a lost well of Galloway, because as you see on this slide, this shows you how it was lost. So the Slot Well is now buried beneath stones which have fallen from the field dike, and a mass of tangled undergrowth grown over it. The person who visited this in 1914 said that there was a stream of water coming out of the ground, so it's obviously still going. And then I kind of like this, that, you know, the Royal Commission sent someone against in 63 and 69, and all they said was no change. You know, it's just like, well, how about, you know, cleaning it up then or something? But no joy. But this is what's so interesting about these places. You know, the slot well, it's a really exciting opportunity to perhaps recover something, you know, to find that well again and to make it accessible. It demonstrates, of course, how some of these wells are lost in the first place. So there's this idea of general deterioration, dereliction, collapse of structures, overgrowth, and you know, there are a lot of sites in Dumfries and Galloway that are in a pretty sorry state. I don't think we would be doing this project if all the wells were in sort of great condition and we all knew about them. It is a bit of an area where there is a bit of a cultural amnesia about these things, and why that is the case, I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what people think about it. But it seems to me that in Dumfries and Galloway, there's never been a kind of an organisation that's really taken it upon themselves to specifically preserve wells or really carry out preventative conservation. You have this in Cornwall, quite sort of early old Cornwall society and other local societies that saved wells or salvaged wells. I mean, they also had their problems. I mean, there's Victorianisation of wells in Cornwall, maybe destruction of evidence and stuff like that. But you know, a lot of wells in the southwest can be visited and appreciated as a result of, if you like, those kind of antiquarian endeavours. But I also just want to talk briefly about sort of broader cultural reasons why wells might have been lost or why they fell into general decline. Certainly in southwest Scotland, the next slide, you know, just illustrates a basic point that you know, the Reformation in Scotland was pretty far ranging and hard hitting. You know, the Scottish Reformation is probably the most significant event in British history outside of, you know, Roman invasion and the Industrial Revolution, because it was a rejection of Catholicism, which of course preserved a lot of much older belief structures, maybe inherited from pre-Christian religions, but also certainly the mass of early medieval pilgrimage and holy well and water reverence was embodied in Catholicism. And a lot of that was swept away in the 16th and 17th centuries. Wells associated with churches are abandoned quite often in southwest Scotland. And also there's that whole other aspect of it, which you know, those people who still continued to visit holy wells were considered superstitious. And that's not just a kind of like oh, you know, slightly strange person doing weird stuff. It's actually, you know, these people are sort of dangerous people. They're religiously unorthodox, and their unorthodoxy was often punished. So to kind of carry on that idea, the next slide looks at, sort of briefly looks at superstition and how that might have contributed to wells becoming lost over time. So this is the Devil's Well, Deal's Well, near Glen Luce. This is such a weird place, right? Very, very strange. The story is that an atheist beggar called Alexander Agnew, he's known as Jock of Broad Scotland to his friends, lodged with the Campbell family in his home in Glen Luce, and it's now known, it's a ruin now, but it's traditionally it's known as Ghost Hall, because the house was haunted. There was poltergeist activity, and there was a pamphlet written in the 1650s all about this. In the 1650s, Gilbert Campbell's daughter Jeanette visited the well. Okay, and she was going one day to the well to bring home some water, and she started to hear this shrill whistling in her ears. And because she'd she'd been living in a poltergeist-infested house for the last few months, she addressed the spirit and said, "I would fain hear thee speak as well as whistle." And the spirit, which she now interpreted as the devil, said back to her in a very threatening manner, "I'll cast thee, Jeanette, into the well," which is pretty, awful. And another weird aspect of this story is that Jock, the beggar, the atheist beggar, was executed in Dumfries in the 1650s, and it was said that the devil of Glen Luce appeared more often after he had died. So there's lots of weird stuff happening here. So what does it kind of all mean? Well, I'd love to explain it thoroughly, but so why is this important? Well, apart from being an interesting account of well, I think what's interesting about this is that it illustrates the Protestant, Calvinist, Presbyterian mindset, if you like, in an important time, 17th century, and it reveals the mindset about how they perceived these places, these wells, sites of antiquity as well, just more generally. So, we know from lots of historical studies that reforming ministers used pre-existing tales of hauntings, sinfulness, transgression, and the supernatural to stop parishioners from visiting sites that they had traditionally always gone to, largely because they wanted to stamp out Popish Roman Catholic ritual. We also know that there's the very strict Protestant Sabbatarianism, the staunch defense of the Sabbath as a holy day, a place of religious, time of religious contemplation, church going, and so on. And this would have, interestingly, directly clashed with traditional observances at holy wells. And we've already seen how you would go to a holy well on the first Sunday in May, so you're breaking the Sabbath. So the idea that the Glen Luce devil, it may have been based on Jeanette Campbell's very real fear that she, as a good Protestant, should not go to a well for anything other than drinking water. She herself talks to the spirit, and that's a big no-no, because, Presbyterian, particularly Protestant religions, although it acknowledges the existence of evil spirits, you should not have any kind of relationship with them. So maybe she felt guilty about visiting a well, which, was part still of a traditional culture. So it's an interesting way of kind of getting into the mindset of why these wells have gone missing, why that might have been the case. And interesting as well that, the Green Well of Scotland, the devil guarding that, the devil's seat. I mean, if a chapel going Christian in the 18th or 19th century was told from the pulpit that, that the devil was roaming at the Green Well, that might then stop you from seeking a cure there for your, vitamin C deficiency or whatever. So, wells, they're such. I think one of the great things about them is that, you kind of get in your mind a typology of what they are and what they're for and what they do. But actually, the more you know, the less you know. And the stories, the ideas, the complexity of all these stories behind them, they always keep you on your toes. So they're places really where myth and legend and history blend together. And it's, really complicated. So, at the risk of trying to overcomplicate things, at Anworth in the next slide, which is just to the sort of west of the Stewartry. Oh yeah, sorry, I meant to have that slide. Never mind. You get the idea. At Anworth, in the next slide, there's the Rutherford's Well. Rutherford is named after Samuel Rutherford. He was a Presbyterian theologian, and by all accounts, really well-respected vicar of Anworth. Anworth Church, of course, is where some scenes from The Wicker Man were filmed in the 70s. Bit of trivia. Anyway, the people of Anworth in the 17th and 18th century, a Presbyterian community, so loved their Protestant Sabbatarian minister, theologian, leader, that they built a well housing for him. out of the house, so relics of his house, is a kind of this kind of almost kind of like Catholic piety to celebrate this individual. And they also told tales about how Samuel Rutherford had protected these standing stones, or these kind of low-lying stones in a field at the back of Amworth, whilst also scolding people for playing football. So, Amworth is one of these really weird places where history surprises you. The standard narratives of, pagan to Christian, stuff doesn't really quite work. It's really, really kind of complex. And I love that complexity. It's so interesting. Now, another kind of weird story relating to Wells is the covenanting landowner called Ramsay in Balmaclellan. In the next slide, now he was well known as a covenanter, and Charles II sought him out and had him arrested in the hope that people who supported him would come out and show themselves. So troops were stationed around this area in the hope that his supporters would come and reap the harvest while Ramsay was away, because the harvest was very important, that needed to be gathered in, and anyone helping Ramsay would then be sort of arrested and locked up as a covenanter, or worse. And if no one came, that was good too, because the crops would die, and then he would lose his seat and he would lose his standing in the community, and it was a win-win situation for the crown. Now, a really interesting story starts to form around this, whereby the poor of this region and the tenant farmers see that Ramsay's estates it could go into ruin. And what they do, they come out at night and they work at night. So they gather in the corn, the hay, etc., and they all under the cover of darkness. Now, for that reason, the well that they use to feed animals and the areas they harvest become known as Brownie's Green and Brownie's Well. And of course, if you know your Dumfries and Galloway folklore, brownies are, of course, supernatural beings that come out at night and do work for you. They give you free labor, and if you pay them, then they go. They leave. It's a bit like the Tailor of Gloucester, so a bit like that, when they come in at night and the elves make loads of clothes, and then he makes clothes for them, and then they're just like, oh right, okay, we're off now. So this kind of folklore is just everywhere, Dumfries and Galloway, and it imbues these sites and the stories behind them. So interesting, and I'm sure again you'll take up the mantle of researching some of these sites, you'll find interesting stuff like this and more. And the next slide is just a great picture of the brownie of Bladnoch, which is like the most famous brownie from Dumfries and Galloway. Now he looks really evil and horrible, but he's just a benign fellow that's really nice. So that's good. So I don't know. I think I'm nearly at the end, but I just want to talk about another well that has now unfortunately been lost. And this next slide shows the Gout well. It's in Minnegaff, well it was, and it's a really interesting place because according to Simpson, who wrote an early account in the late 17th century, this was a small spring well, and again visited on the 1st of May for the curing of gout. People washed and drank water. And they left offerings there. And another writer mentions the experience of a piper who comes here, and he likes a drink, and he stole money from the well, and he went to the local pub and got drunk. And of course, poetic justice, he was stricken with gout, and the only way he could get cured was to return to the gout well and return the money he stole, and then he was healed, which he was. And again, this was a story relating to a place that people went to year upon year upon year upon year. And unfortunately, we don't know how long that went on for. There's accounts, other wells that, you know, we have accounts of this kind of procession and pilgrimage and healing rituals going back as late as the 1680s. My guess would be that they're happening much longer than that. But this well, unfortunately, is now lost. It's submerged under commercial forestry, which was, I think it was put up there certainly in the last 50 years or so, maybe even more recently. So it's a big shame, and it just highlights that you know, there's lots of ways in which wells can go missing, lots of ways in which they can kind of disappear from our experience, and generations will never see that well anymore. And this is why this project's so important. It really is. Now, I could go on for ages talking about other, you know, important tropes in sort of holy well research. The idea that, you know, after the Reformation, wells became repurposed and they were used for the new physics, new medicine, and proto-medical people gathered around them and used them for cures, and, you know, all that kind of thing. And it's really important, but I just wanted to sort of give you some juicy stuff that would be really interesting, that would hopefully inspire you to get out there. Of course, this stuff is interesting too. And I think maybe, Claire, you're going to cover some of that as well, aren't you? The physic wells and stuff like that, which is cool. So just to conclude, well, I think, yeah, I think as we've kind of seen, you know, wells really are really hugely significant places. They're sort of teeming with mythological, folkloric, and historical meaning, and I think they just tell us a lot, really, about how we as communities used to live, how we thought and communed with others, as well as the world around us and the world beyond. And I think that's really important. And I think they are intrinsic to our identity, and they underline concerns that we have as, you know, fragile human beings experiencing the sort of vagaries of time. And we've seen how, you know, with the contemporary experience of the COVID pandemic and other stuff, you know, how that finds expression today, you know, in modern expressions at holy wells. And I'm sure you've all got similar experiences of that as well. And you know, I just think that, you know, in an increasingly unstable and fragmented world, you know, climate change, population displacement, these things will happen. Perhaps, you know, these sites, local water supplies, sources of water, and not just physical sources of water, but these places will become more important to us. You know, well springs of culture, shared memory, an anchor really in changing times. And I think, you know, Claire's going to go through this a bit, but, you know, there's quite a few named wells in Galloway whose histories we don't really know much about. And that history is yet to be written, and hopefully you can do that. You know, it's your chance to contribute to this, a collective knowledge about the landscape, which I think is in some way a sort of a ultimately knowledge about ourselves as well. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, go for it. Get on board with all that Claire tells you now. You've got to do it.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic, Peter. Thanks so much. What a range of influences they've had on our culture over the years. It's just fascinating, and I love the way that some of them, maybe they just are spiritual or mythical, but then some of them, like the brownie, you know, that was a real thing that happened and in real life, but then it got mythologized maybe, and now you just read brownie. You don't know, do you? So, fascinating. So I'll just have a quick look through some questions. People were loving it, I think, which is really good. You made a few references to vitamin C, and so Laura was just wondering, and this might be out of your knowledge area, but, you know, could that be linked to watercress flowing at springs? Do you think that that's a real link?
Oh, I don't know, honestly. I mean, yeah, there's one way to find out. I mean, I was reading the other day in the Transactions Dumfries and Galloway Natural History Society that they've done loads of surveys of what kind of plants were growing where, and I noticed that there were some sections on holy wells, but to be honest with you, rather stupidly. I kind of skimmed them because I wasn't really looking at plants or plant lore or anything. But that's a really good idea, actually, that maybe these places were actually, like, herbariums, where the kind of kitchen physic idea, was really important. And yeah, I mean, there are, of course, there are amazing places for biodiversity. So yeah, that's a really good.
And they did know their stuff.
Question, which I'm sure you're right about.
They might not have known why it was good for them, but they did know that these things were good for them. Bob made a comment about building churches over wells, and then you can kind of absorb the traditions into the church. I think that was at the point when you were talking about the church wells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to know more about that, there's a book by Jeremy Hart that's mainly about English holy wells, but he goes into that whole idea about the continuity of sites between pagan and Christian sites, and he has some interesting things to say about it. So.
Yeah, fabulous, really interesting. And then there's been a few questions actually about the minerals in the water, and I'm going to say it wrong. Chalybeate. Okay, what are those mineral-rich ones?
Yeah.
How do you pronounce?
Yeah, the kind of the iron. Yeah. Chalybeate. Chalybeate is how I say it, but
Annie's asked do you know anything about a well at Kirkmadrin on the Rins? Does that ring any bells?
Yeah. Well, there is. I visited Kirkmadrin last year, I think it was, and what's really interesting there, because that's the place where there's the kind of the chapel with all the carved crosses in. Now, they have a carved cross at Kirkmadrin, which has been interpreted by art historians as having a water motif on it, which they've interpreted as the Celtic cross, circa 500 to 600, something like that, carries this water motif because of that very strong relationship synthesis between water and early Celtic Christianity, and that the water motif on the cross probably relates to the fact that there were numerous wells around Kirkmadrin. None of them are named, as far as I'm aware. You look at the maps, but there are lots of springs, and I've looked at the springs around Kirkmadrin, and they're basically like depressions in the ground. They don't appear to have any kind of well structure, but that doesn't mean they're not holy wells.
Okay, very interesting. Annie's commented that she's been told it's called the Well of the Mother, and then the church was built over it. So,
wow, yeah, okay.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. Well, there's loads of stuff here, but what I do want to do is get onto Claire's talk, because I think that's going to be really interesting as well. But I think over to you, Claire.
Okay, right, I'll try and share my screen now. I'm going to start with the PowerPoint, and then we'll go online and see if that works. So, right, so as Peter, that was wonderful, thank you, Peter, went through, we kind of thoroughly explained what made Wells so special, and so why we've made it the focus of one of our projects this year. So I'm going to talk a bit about the project that we're looking to do, and that we're hoping to launch tonight, and for everyone to get involved in, because essentially we want to try and compile a list of our named wells and the stories behind them. I will then take you through a kind of step-by-step kind of guide on how we are guiding you to research the wells, just picking out the kind of main resources that you can use online, all of which are free and accessible. It's worth noting as well that a lot of these resources that I'm pointing and talking about are good for general heritage research, so they can be used for other things other than wells, so don't be worried about that. So to talk about the project, our aim is that we're going to break up the area into blocks or map squares, and then we'll assign everyone who gets in touch that is interested in taking part, will get assigned their own exclusive map square. And this is going to be a case of you just research everything within your block. So you're trying to get a big list of all the named wells that you have within your area and any research you've done into the background of them. Now, because it's an online project, it's open to everyone. You don't have to be living nearby. We are hoping that maybe come the summer that we might try and get out and visit some wells. So that would be more local people, but depending on restrictions and how everything goes. And obviously at the moment, if you live right next to a well, and you might want to go out and have a wee look, then that's fine, although we've got some safety tips that we will share with you on our guidance notes. But what we're going to do as well is it's not just named wells we're going to look at. We're going to also look at named pools, named springs. I actually saw somebody had mentioned the murder hole. And then somebody else rightly pointed out that the murder hole, which has a lovely story, which if nobody knows, then get in touch with Helen and we'll fire it to you. When I say lovely, I mean, you know, it's grim, but it's a good kind of story that was written in the 1800s. But that, yes, it's correctly, that's part of the loch. But what we're going to look at is, because it's quite hard to tell, is we are going to open it up to named pools, because that way we can look at all the traditions around these. Even if it's not strictly a well, we're going with it being named, then we're hoping to try and find a wee bit of background, and it's kind of people's relationship with water and sources of water in their area. So that's just so you know. So we'll assign you a kind of a map square like this. So if you get in touch, the way would be to email Helen. If you have a specific area that you're interested in, or even a specific well, then let us know, and we will assign you the map square around that has that well or that area in it. If you're happy for just a random map square from across the Galloway Glens area, then just say that as well, and we will issue a nice, whichever one that we'll try and be good and give you ones to start off that have interesting wells in. We'll cheat slightly, but to be honest, I don't think you'll get, I think they all have several named water sources within them, because obviously you'll see wells across the area, but what we're looking at is the named ones, as Peter has explained. They're the ones that have got kind of some level of importance attached to them, and they tend to have the stories that then we can glean a bit of heritage information from. So we'll send you the map square just like this, as it is on the screen. We'll add in the corner coordinates for you and what parish it's in. So that way you should hopefully be able to try and locate your square, but I'll tell you as well how to locate it in other ways. My example square is actually not within Galloway Glens. It's just a little bit to the west in Minigaff, because I wanted to not steal any potential wells that people wanted to look at. So I thought I would do one just outside. Right away, before I've done anything else, the other thing to look for when you're writing things down and keeping notes of stuff is place names. So that's not the site of a well on this map, but because it says Punchwell Brae, then that's a strong indication that there was once a well there. That might not be there anymore, but they might still be able to find it in old mappings and try and find the story behind it. So I just wanted to highlight that before we move on. And this is also, as well as your map square, we have made a kind of info sheet. So that's the front of the info sheet on I think it's a couple of pages. These are about 2 or 3 pages each. This has got fun facts and some pictures of some wells around Dumfries and Galloway, but also we'll give you the how-to guide for the well research. So that's essentially what I'm presenting to you tonight, is kind of step by step with links and everything. That is all included in that how-to guide for well research. So even if you just want that for information, then yes, just get in touch with Helen, and Helen will happily fire it across to you. That's fine. So don't worry about having to try and write everything down as we go. It's all written down for you beforehand, and we'll just send you a copy of that. So the next one, so what I'm mainly going to focus on to get you started on your research is 4 main resources. Past map, historic mapping at the National Library of Scotland, Scotland's places, and also the place names of the Galloway Glens database, which is quite a nice new addition that the Galloway Glens has supported and just been created in the past couple of years. So that's great. So what I am now going to attempt is to come out of this. This is us. We're going to start at past map. So what I can actually just do, past map is really easy to look. You can just search for past map, and there we go. Welcome into past map. Now, past map ties into the Canmore database. So Canmore is the National Historic Record for Scotland. It is maintained by Historic Environment Scotland. It has over 320,000 entries, sites. It's a huge variety of sites. It's pretty much everything that's ever been recorded as a heritage site within Scotland. And it can be anything. It can be World War II, it can be an Iron Age hill fort, or it could be just somewhere they found some lithic scatters. So if you've not been into past map, please do venture. It is a very helpful resource. However, saying that, there's a surprising lack of wells on past map. And for surprise, Peter talked quite a lot about the Green Well of Scotland. And obviously, even when you visit the Greenwell of Scotland, there's an information panel that has quite a lot of information. It seems to have been known to have been a Clootie well. It's got all this folklore attached. It's not in PassMap. It's not on Canmore. It doesn't have an entry, which I was quite surprised at. And by contrast, though, Slot Well and the Rumbling Well over by Dalbeattie do have entries in Canmore. So it's a little bit varied, but quite a lot of the wells we'll probably look at probably won't have an entry in PassMap. But equally, I should point out that Dumfries and Galloway Council Archaeology Service have their historic environment record. It's obviously a lot more detailed for Dumfries and Galloway, and it does have the Greenwell of Scotland included, and it has other wells that maybe are missing from Canmore. Although again, it doesn't have all of them. So that's one of the places we're hoping to deposit all our information, is to Peter at the museum service, but also over to the Council Archaeology Service as well. So right, back to the task at hand. So if we're going into PassMap, just emphasize a bit. You see you're quite zoomed out, because now the reason we're starting with PassMap is, although I've just said you won't find many entries for wells, is that I think the best way to start your search is probably to look at modern mapping. And one of the best ways to do that is PassMap. And I'll show you in a wee second why. But well, one, it's easy. You have this search bar over here. So if you take one of your corner coordinates, say, you can easily just type it in there. This is where I type it wrong and it goes awry. 1, 2, 3. Okay, hit return and it should zoom right in. Is it working? Yes. Okay. Helen hasn't shouted at me yet, so I'm going to assume this is working for everybody watching. But see how, so it's taking me right to that bottom right corner of my map square. And see if you zoom out, it changes the mapping depending on how zoomed in or out you are. So it's actually a really good place to start. Now our blocks are usually going to be about 5 kilometers square. So, and you can see my Punchwell Brae is there. So what's quite handy is, obviously at this zoom out level, I can only see Punchwell Brae, but you can zoom in again and see a lot more comes up. So that's quite handy. And if I move across, see, that's too far because there's a whole bunch of wells. Right, this is in my area. So we've got Quaking Ash Well. So you can see that as well as your place names that spring out with having a well or a spring in them, it's written in blue is your kind of water features mainly. So there is one I would probably note down, Quaking Ash. And you can see as well, there's kind of sometimes archaic spellings of them that have lasted. So that W-I-E-L is quite notable. It appears quite a few times. And also, like I said, hole sometimes can be named like a hole, and that will refer maybe to a pond or a well that might have been a source. And if you go up, there's a Mackay well. And this Auld Wife's Stank, I would take a note of that as well, because it looks like it could be a kind of water feature. So I'll keep a note of that. And then if you zoom in even more, you can see that there's the dog pool and the poacher's pool. So I would keep a note of them as well. But what you can do here is, yeah, probably at this kind of level, if you see like something that hints kind of like there, you can zoom in just to have a double check. But probably at that level is a good place to have a wee look, see how many things you can spot, create your list. And the other thing you can do in PassMap is if you click on a point, it'll come up to get your easting and northing, because it's quite handy to keep a note of the coordinates of your location of your well. I mean, ultimately that would be one of the main things we would want is the location. So if you just take this easting and northing, that's very helpful. And it also, it updates it down at the bottom as you're moving around. Now, the other thing you can do is, I'm just going to turn them all on, is you can put in, although I don't think Canmore Maritime will be here, but this is all the layers you can get. Now you can see this is what makes PassMap so good. It's because you get listed buildings, shared road monuments, you get the Canmore entries, it might be, and then you also get the historic environment record. So that's your green. So they essentially come up in these splodges, these little blobs, coloured blobs here, and then you get the information coming up here. And if it's in the Canmore, you can easily click on that and eventually will take you across to the Canmore entry. So this is gives you a wee bit of information. This is sometimes varied in how detailed it can be. So I will then take you back to PassMap. So that opens it up a new window. So you've got this remaining. And yes, and then, okay, so I think the other thing as well to keep a note of, oh, for goodness sake, sorry, is the base layers. You can change the base layers. So you can actually see the first edition here, but I'm going to take you to a different website to look at the mapping because you get a lot more choice. But you can play around. I think that's the best thing with these is just to play around, turn things on and off and see what you can find out. Because remember as well that even if you don't have a, sorry, that base map is obviously not helpful. Even if you can't find your well, something you can do in PassMap is if the well's not marked, but you know it's the location of a well in that area, which you might have got from the historic mapping, you can come back into PassMap and have a look at the area around it. So maybe there was a church, maybe there was ruins of a church that do have a Canmore entry next to the site, or a farmstead that it might somehow be related to, and you can get information from there as well. So it's just a case of not noting everything down and getting as much information as you can. And obviously at the bottom of Canmore entries, you also sometimes get references. So that's more further reading that you can then have a wee look into and see what else you can find. So there we go. Next up, we are going to go to the National Library, and I'm actually going to open. I'm going to do this. Oh no, I was organized here. I organized all my bookmarks earlier, which took me a wee while, obviously. Here we go. Okay, now, if you haven't been to the National Library of Scotland's map archive, then you haven't lived, because really this is a good place to go. So there are many ways you can explore the maps in the National Library. So I've tried to find the best place for you to start off in this instance, but please, again, like PassMap, play about, go in, have a look, nosy around at all the different options you've got. But starting here, this is where you've got your list, you've got your names, you can now come over here and have a wee look to see what the history, what a kind of map sequence for your wells are. So I would turn it to Scotland because that will bring up the most relevant mapping for yourself when you're looking at the Dumfries and Galloway. And again, as with PassMap, you can write in your grid coordinates and hit return. And in theory, it will take you in. Although it does crazy things, which I'm realizing, and I turn it back to Scotland, right. And you can see the big selection that you have here. So what I would do is I would start modern and work your way back, because that will be the most recognizable area for yourself until you get a bit orientated. Then you're able to work your way back through the mapping. So you can see, aha, that we are in my example area. And you can see that actually the well is marked here. So for getting information down here on the bottom right is the published date for your map. So I can see that in 1955, the well was marked. But obviously by the time of the modern mapping shown on PassMap, it's only the place name, the brae that's been named after Punchwell is what's marked, not the well itself. So what makes me curious, is the well still there and badly overgrown and just people have forgotten all about it? Or yeah, has it been destroyed in some way? That would be interesting. Or is it just hard to locate? One thing as well is because, for example, I've got the well here, but as opposed to the brae, you can linger your cursor over it and you'll notice in the bottom right hand corner that the coordinates come up in the bottom right. So you can take a bit, if you want a bit more accurate location information for your wells, you can get it from there. The other thing as well is if you want to go maybe to a specific well or feature that you've identified, you can type in the coordinate straight, it will take you straight to your well and you can sit and then have a look. Like I say, this isn't that detailed. You get your eye in. Some of the details, some of the maps are a bit more detailed than others, so you'll get a little bit more. I notice for this one, now obviously for the most part, this is not going to be of much help, although you notice it's got rocking stone, but actually, weirdly, it does have the punch well on it. It's overlaid, and that is actually 1968, so that's a slightly later date. So what's really useful is you can keep a note of what maps your well or your pool, your site turns up on, but it's really helpful to have the earliest it appears and the latest it appears, and whether it's still on modern mapping or not. That's particularly helpful. So what I would say is definitely want to be looking at, let's have a look at that one, the 1 to 10,560. That can be quite, I'll have more detail on it, so you can get the punch well. But then there's other ones, let me see, the 1 inch, well, that's a punch well, but you won't necessarily have, it doesn't have quaking ash well on it, which, so I would say what you definitely want to include is your 6-inch maps. Now you've got the 2nd edition, the mapping's just named after 1st edition was the first survey they did. Then they went out and they resurveyed it all again. That's your 2nd edition, 3rd edition. So it's just the dates. It's just gone by that. But I would look at your 6-inch ones. They tend to be quite detailed. So actually that'll have all your names, but specifically make sure you've got the first OS in. So 6-inch, 18, so 6-inch, the 1st edition, because that is, that's beautiful maps. There's some beautiful mapping there. That's kind of your earliest mapping that looks like what you would the level of detail that you recognize today. So a lot of things that will probably be the first occurrence of them is on your first OS. So you can see the quaking ash well, I believe punch well. This is where I got all lost and show off my skills for getting lost before I just abandon and go, yeah, it's in there somewhere. Yeah, it's in there. So that's what we do, and then we abandon. And we go, obviously, you know, I'd be more organized if I was doing this myself. But you can see Mackay's well turns up there, so that's quite great. And you can also see Old Wife Stank, although this is going to annoy me, but I'll explain that later. So you can see how lovely the mapping is there. Probably that first OS is the most likely. There are some before, but they will have a lot less detail. But as always have a wee look at Roy just to see some very nice mapping. Now, William Roy's survey of Scotland was done in response to the Jacobites. So it was done kind of 1947 to 55. He mapped the whole of Scotland, and obviously it was a military survey. So it was for the purpose of identifying routes and locations of things to help. It was after the 1745 rebellion. But it's really, Roy tends to be the earliest mapping that's very useful. There are slightly earlier mapping because Pont, and who was then redone by Blow. Pont's about 1596. Blow redid his mapping in about 1654, but it's a bit harder to get your head round, and also it won't have wells. But one thing, that if you're chasing a place name back, then it is worth going back to see if it's on Roy, and it's worth going back and get in touch with us or play about on the maps, and you'll be able to find the earlier maps as well of Blow and things and see if the place name goes back further. But unfortunately, it probably won't have the wells. But like I say, have a wee look at Roy anyway, just because it's very pretty. It's a very nice map, and there's quite a lot of detail when you come into towns and things like that. And it even marks Riggin Furrow, so that's where farming settlements would have been. Okay, and you can see how it's got, but this is why it's helpful to work back from modern mapping, because as well as you see, there's quite a lot of alternative spellings to some of the names, and they change over the years. I would say as you're looking at any site and researching it, but in the case of our wells as well, is keep a note of any alternative spellings, because that'll help you when you're doing a hunt later on, because you never know what spelling it will come under. Now, before you leave the mapping, go back into this option. I have to zoom out a wee bit. How far in you're zoomed will affect what maps appear. So if you're not getting them, zoom out a wee bit. And it's worth looking at the estate maps, because damp, so that's the Dumfries and Dumfries Archival Mapping Project, I think I've got that right, that Galloway Glens has been supporting. They've actually scanned and uploaded quite a lot of maps from our area. So that's particularly helpful. And they are nice to look at. Now this keeps doing it to me. It was doing this to me earlier. Yeah, it keeps going. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then hopefully state maps. There we go. So you can see they come up. And depending how zoomed out you are, affects the selection of maps that will come up, but you can zoom right in. So of course, the state maps are more about planning out kind of land plots and things like that. It was to do with the improvement eras a lot of the time. So it was estate, people that owned estates wanted the estate maps made out because they were planning to make improvements to their farms and locations. But it does have details of other things on it, like crofts. And so you might find the odd one in there, and it's obviously got some heritage sites, so it might find the odd one in there. It's worth a check. I think, let me see if I have anything else. I think that's mostly it for the maps. And remember, if you have a thorough look of your area on, for example, the first OS, you can then go back to past map to see if there is a site that maybe you wouldn't have seen on the modern mapping, to see if it does have it, or again, like I say, anything associated nearby. Okay, so the next up that I want to do is Scotland's places. So you can just type in, well, okay, mine recognises it because I've been looking at it all day, but I'm going to pretend like I've not been looking at it. Here we go, Scotland's places. Taking a wee while. So Scotland's Places is a free resource for everyone to use. It is very good. It has lots of records on it. One of the main kind of record base that it has is tax records. So if from about the kind of 17th century, 1700s on, tax was a big source of revenue. So they taxed as much as possible. So there is series of tax. There's land tax, window tax, hearth tax, cart tax, farm horse tax, dog tax. There's clock watch tax, which varied depending on whether it was gold or silver or metal. And there's servant tax, which was more expensive for the male servants. But so it's all there, but it's really handy for looking, and you'll find names come up, and getting names associated with places can be really helpful. Now, what's probably going to be most beneficial for looking at wells and things is the name book. So this is the Ordnance Survey name book. This is for across Scotland and across the UK, and they've all been scanned up into Scotland's places. It's a really great resource. It's this people that surveyed the first edition Ordnance Survey. They went out and they kind of stayed with the locals. They made a written record of every name that appeared. So quite often it will have a story or a tradition or an origin or folklore or legend. They noted it all down if it was information that was given to them. Now, the idea was that they were supposed to be only talking to kind of higher up people in society that they viewed at the time. So like landowners, estate owners, ministers and that kind of thing. But the reality is, when they went around, they knocked on people's doors and they spoke to the people that lived there. And I think and sometimes it was them, they actually put them up and they stayed with them. So that's probably where they got a lot of their information. Now for this, I want to leave my example square and show you a different one. Now this is going to pull back to what Peter had been talking about, the rumbling well and the slot well. So to search on Scotland's places, just this search term in the top right corner. Now, watch a little bit for alternate spellings. It can be a bit fussy, and if you're not getting any hits, what you try different spellings, or maybe just narrow it slightly. So just put in one word from the name and see what comes up. But I'm cheating because I've checked this already. That doesn't mean it's going to work this time, but hopefully. Right, so you might have a few things come up from over the country, but Kirkcudbrightshire OS name books. Okay, so I'm going to go to Rumbling Well. Now, I'm moving you across my screen. So you come in here and it's lovely. They've got a picture up of the original page. So that's actually really nice. For most of it, for quite a lot, there is a transcription where it's been transcribed at the bottom. For some reason, everyone that I'm looking at does not have a transcription at the bottom, but I quite like trying to decipher these things anyway. But I would say that if you're doing this and you get a bit stuck on trying to decipher something, then please, send us the link and we will try and help you. You're not on your own, but you can only do your best. So looking at the name book, obviously they've put in the names. They put in alternative spellings. Now the name book's really good. It does farmsteads and everything as well, and it's occasionally got some other features. I don't know if anybody saw, I won't go into it, but we put a story up on our social media about Snake Bank. If you have time, look that one up in the name book. That gives you an interesting story to the background of that. So the authority are the people that they asked. They're the people that told them the story. So that would be, so sometimes that can be helpful for a bit of detective work if you're trying to look at who stayed somewhere, because it might be often neighbours, people that live nearby. The situation, so a rough location, and then we've got this description. Now, okay, I've cheated and typed this up earlier to make my life a bit easier, but I can kind of mostly read it. But so I'll read you the entry. So this is Rumbling Well. So this is the well that Peter mentioned that sits near to Dalbeattie Reservoir, just to the west of Dalbeattie in Bittle. So, right, so the entry for this one in the name book is, this is a small and good spring upon the farm of, and I think that's New Bittle, and used to be resorted to by the credulous. In this parish of Bittle, about a mile from the kirk towards the north, is a well called the Rumbling Well, frequented by a multitude of sick people for all sorts of diseases. The first Sunday of May is what I think it comes off a bit. Lying here the Saturday night and then drinking of it early in the morning. So that is essentially what Peter was talking about as well. So that's in the name book, which is this great, it actually has it in there, and it even has this little reference that they've added. So the now and again, depending if there's one or two I've seen they've even added a wee sketch of the feature in, which is lovely. But here they've even told you, and I've heard of this book, Simpson's description of Galloway, that there's more information in there. So you can note everything, you can note this down, you can note down that. If you are trying to reference what you've got in the name book, this little reference number up here is quite handy. That tends to be your kind of archive reference for that one. And the other one that Peter mentioned is the Slot Well. So I just wanted to look that one up. I would have thought there would be more hits. I would have thought there'd be more Slot Wells, but seemingly. But luckily, oh, I've opened that in a different. I've opened that in a different window. Here we go. Now again, so this sits about a field to the east of the Rumbling Well. And I quite like this because obviously it shows that they had these healing wells, but they had one for people and they had a separate one for animals. So the animals had their own healing wells, which I always quite like. Again, this is one that hasn't been transcribed, but I looked, it's got the same reference. So you come upon, so just to read this out for you, a spring upon the farm of Bittle Place and used, oh, I should read what, and used to be resorted to by the credulous. This well is made use of by the country people when their cattle are troubled with a disease called by them the conic. I think that is down there. So yes, so I'm getting the impression that the writer is not as convinced by the healing properties of these wells, but you know, there, which is quite amusing as well. I quite like that. So you can see that it's quite complete. Now, the other thing I would say in Scotland's places is if you come across a well that has like a person's name attached to it, then you can also search for people in Scotland's places. But there are other resources that are available if you do want to look into a certain person, so you can get in touch with us. But we also have on the Galloway Glens website in the resources section, if you go into Can You Dig It, there is like a note from one of our web-based research workshops that we did, and it is very full. Louise, my colleague Louise wrote it all, and it names all of the different resources available. Like I say, we're just picking kind of, I'm just narrowing it down to give you somewhere to start. Okay, so the next one will be, now this is the place names database. Make sure I've got the right one. Okay. Sorry, I'm moving you around my screen as I talk. That's what's going on, actually. Okay, so we go into the place names of the Galloway Glens. So this is actually fairly new. This has been made over the last couple of years, supported by the Galloway Glens project. It's the University of Glasgow. It's great. It's not got a lot of coverage for Kirkcudbright, but it has got all the rest of our area. It's got quite a few parishes in it. It's got, I think it's over 2,500 entries, if I'm right. I think, yeah, I'm getting a nod from Helen. That's a good sign. I pay attention. Now, there's, like everything else, there's many ways to search, and there's the quick search in the corner. But one I would suggest looking at is going into browse place names as a good place to start. And then you can go to the parish. And you can see that it lists all the parish and the number of entries against each parish. But what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to go a bit, well, no, I have to be in our area, so I can't use my example square for this one. I've clicked on Carstern. And why I quite liked going in here was because you get it as points on a map. So it means that you can zoom in and check your area again to see in case there's anything you've missed. And what's great is this amazing key over here. So you can kind of turn off all the ones you don't, these are all amazing, but I don't care right now for any of them other than water. And then you can linger in, with technically some dodgy names in there, right? So we've got Mungo as well. So I was going to click on that. So you click on and you can get a wee overview here, or you can actually just view the record. Will come up. So I wanted the Mungo as well, because I wanted to show you an option here of one that, like Peter's mentioned, that was named after a saint. So we've got quite a lot of information here. They also have a look at the OS name book, so they've got usually quite got the information from the OS name book, but they also sometimes do a bit of their own research to see if they found out anything. A bit more detail about where it is, and also you can look at historical forms, so you can see what maps it appears on, and they give and links to see the maps, and it will also tell you about the elements as well, which is obviously, that's what the place name is great for, is looking at the different elements that appear and what the origins of the name comes from. So that is worth having on the list. I think other than that, the next, last but not least, is just generally doing a general internet search. I have to say, archaeologists, sometimes, we always do this. This is not, it's worth having a look. So I put Rumbling Well, and I would actually specify your parish, because like I see. So as you can see, for the Rumbling Well, I've used this one because there's a few that won't get many hits. But the thing with the internet is, obviously, there's lots of local people that have made websites and resources, or done blog posts about wells. Yeah, you'll be surprised about the wealth of information that's out there that somebody's already done a lot of research in. And obviously some wells, like the Green Well of Scotland, has so many stories attached to it that you'll get a few hits for that one as you're looking through. So it was just to show you an example. There's one in specific I want to look at. I think it's this one. So this is the Church of Scotland. It has actually got this, they put up. Now you can actually view the statistical accounts on a separate, it's EDINA, Edinburgh University, which we've got that link on the big list of online resources that I told you about. But at the end of the day, if you just get in contact with us, always get in contact with us. Easy for us to ask questions, ask away. If you want a bit of hints or anything else, it's either through the social media or Helen's email. So if I scroll down, this came up, and actually it's got this lovely, a couple of paragraphs about the Rumbling Well and the Slot Well as well, and it's talking about the healing, and it's also looks similar. It's got some extra, I think it's got additional information, because I read, is it here? But yes, for the Slot Well, where they took the animals, they would usually leave as an offering some of the kind of the ropes or things that they used to bind the animals. They would leave behind at the well as a kind of offering. So yes, always worth doing. And also if you've got a particular type of well, so as we're talking about the physic wells, there's a few of them about in the Calibite. I'm not even going to try. I've written it, I just can't say it. Then yes, look into this, look up this, do a general search of these types of wells, because it always enriches a record if you then say this is a type of well that's quite common, this is why it was so important, this is the role that it played elsewhere, because the information might not be there for this specific well, but you know that it's part of it's likely hinting at how important this well also had, because it's of that variety. But this was back into my example square at the start. These are the kind of 6 that I came across. So that was the Punchwell Brae, Mackay's Wheel, Aldwife Stank, Quaking Ash, Poacher's Pool and Dog Pool. So it was just to let you know what I had found out about those by going through that kind of process. So the Punchwell that I came across, so I was able to find that it was on, like I pointed out actually when we were talking, that you could still see it up until the 60s on the maps. Of the well itself, not just the Brae, but it goes back, and it was on the original first OS map, and then also found in the OS name book and got the story behind it. So a good spring well on that portion of Larg Hill called Punchwell Brae, which is strange because it's named after the well, so I'm not sure. Its name originated from the circumstance of shepherds, farmers and friends sometimes ascending the hill for the view of the surrounding country, and who are in the habit of making punch and drinking it there, which I was surprised by punch being the drink of choice, but that's quite nice. So I like that. That's obviously, it's been a big meeting place, and so that's why it's got the name Punch Well. So it's not always going to be a big healing wells and things like that, but there might still be a nice story attached. Mackay's Well, so obviously that's still on modern mapping. I pulled up the kind of most recent map that was on NLS, and it goes back to the first edition. And then I found it on the OS name book. That one wasn't so happy. You might find a few that are named for this reason, but it's a deep pool in the water of Minnock. Its name originated from a man called Mackay who was drowned in it. So yeah. So that's a bit more unfortunate, but it's still a story. Unfortunately, Mackay, the name, I tried to do a bit of a search, but there's quite a lot on the name of Mackay, but and kind of genealogy, but without a first name, it's a bit of a struggle trying to see if I can find the story of this person. The Quaking Ash Wheel, again, goes back to the first OS. There was 2, this was something that benefited from doing a search for Quaking Ash and not just the wheel, because there was 2 entries for it. One that just said it was because there was an ash tree over it, but the other one that specifically said a deep pool in the water of Minnock over which leaned an ash tree which shook with the slightest breeze, hence the name. So that's quite nice. Sometimes it's quite a simple story, but it's still quite nice because it obviously was notable, probably held, you know, it was like a kind of nice childhood memory or something for people that they remembered going by. And the last 3 I pulled up a bit more empty. Poacher's Pool and Dog Pool didn't seem to be on any historical mapping available on the National Library of Scotland. It seemed to be only on the modern maps. Now, this is one of those things that if you were out and about and really wanted to know, you could probably knock on some doors of the people living nearby and they might know, because it might be more of a recent tale that's given it the name. Obviously nowadays though, we're sticking to online resources at the moment, so yeah, maybe something for the future. Aldwife Stank as well, I couldn't find. It goes back to the first edition, so it should be in the name book, but I've not been able to find it. I've not had a lot of time this week. I wanted to sit and see if I could trawl a bit more, but I haven't been able to find that one. So if anyone does, let me know. And yes, so a couple of things was just, if you want to get involved, it's just a case of emailing Helen. I'm sure she'll talk about it a wee bit more. Any point, it is just for fun. Whatever you can send us through, if you don't need to go into depth into every resource that's available. I mean, even if you just give us a list of names and their locations or something, just whatever you find is more than we had before, and we'll be very grateful for it, and we'll add it into our database. Remember, it's just for fun. Remember as well that there are some that you will just hit a wall and there just won't be anything, like my dog and Poacher's Pool. There was just nothing really to find, but don't worry, there's always another well. So So yeah, and it still adds to the information. And also remember that we're only looking at online resources. There might be more that would be available if the archives were opened up. But yeah, we can still find out surprisingly quite a lot online, and it's getting more and more by the day. They keep adding more and more. So yes, I think that's me.
That was great, Claire. Thank you so much. Really interesting to chase it through and to see your kind of systematic way of working it back. Absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much. I'm going to add credulous to my list of insults. My back. I feel that's a good addition to my list of insults. I'm aware of the time. I know, I mean, obviously everybody's very welcome to go whenever they want. I would just like to bring in Catch Holmes, if that's all right with you, Catch, not to put you on the spot. And I'm going to see if I can just ask Catch to give us 2 minutes on her sort of different aspect of response to this project. So we'll just see if we can find.
Hello.
Catch. Hi, Catch. Hi. There we go.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire and Peter. That was really interesting and loads of stuff to get started with. I first got involved. I'm a creative producer, but I first got interested in Wales because I grew up in Carmarthen, and I have been writing stories about the Green Well of Scotland since I was at primary school in Carmarthen, and I've always been sort of interested in it. And I'm involved in running the Knockingorrock Music Festival, which is Knockingorrock, where I grew up, is literally just over the hill, down the river. So should I say up the River Duke, up from the Green Well of Scotland. So I'm practically on it, really. And I also ran more recently around a multilingual project called Oran Bakri, which was based around the multilingual heritage of the area. Specifically, obviously, the poem mentions Carmarthen, mainly about Gaelic. And more recently, I had a project around the Green Well of Scotland, which has had to be postponed due to COVID. But I am really looking forward to doing a short series of podcasts around the Lost Wells project, and visiting some of the other wells in the region and hearing a bit about some of the other wells in the region. I'm really interested in the place where myth meets history meets current community. And so I want to learn not just from experts like yourselves, Claire and Peter, but also local historians and anybody who knows a little bit about these kinds of places. So I think it's a really interesting project, and yeah, can't wait to get stuck in.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thanks. Thanks, Catch. I think it's going to be organic in its nature, isn't it? We're going to wait and see what comes in from the research, and then see what your response to that is. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting addition to this, and not something we've done before. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I'm aware again of the time. Obviously, everybody must just go when they want to, but also I want to give opportunity for a few questions. I will say, I think I've got, if I can find it. Ooh, that's not right. I might just have to talk through. If you're interested, how to follow up on this, if you're interested, email myself, helen.kerran@dumgal.gov.uk, and I'll send out the information sheets to everybody here. So you can have a look through the information sheets in general. Then you can just get going. People have said, what format do we want the information in? I think anything that you've got, maybe English would be easiest, but whatever you've got in you, send it to me, and I'll send it on to the right place. So we funnel it all through me so that we don't have email addresses whizzing everywhere. We're also created a closed Facebook, private Facebook group. We've not done that before. So if you're on Facebook and you want to get into this, you want to jump in with both boots, then search for the Lost Wells of Galloway Glens on Facebook. You'll find a group, ask to join it. I'll let you in, and we can chat, we can share research tips, we can share our findings. Claire will be on hand, Peter might duck in occasionally, Catch. You know, I'm hoping it will be a really nice private environment where we can share our findings about this topic. And then we'll see how it goes. We can, you know, I've kind of got a month in my head, but we'll see how it goes. If people are loving it, we'll keep going. But at some point we'll come back and we'll share our findings with the group, or maybe the wider public. And also, obviously, Catch will take it on in that other direction as well. So that's the plan. Yes, Catch. Yeah, hang on.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said I may, you know, the podcast may also involve the odd interview, and so I may well be coming forward to some of you if you've got interesting stories about whales around you, just to get your take on things. So hopefully that'll be okay.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic if people were up for that.
Mhm.
So I think that's the kind of formal part of the evening over, such as it is. But if people want to, if people have got questions for Catch or Peter or Claire, then do feel free to put them into the chat. Oh, Doug suggested the King's Well on the Rins of Kells. I don't know if you know that one, Peter. Says that's an amazing place.
Yeah, it's quite. Is that quite high up? I think it's on a looking over Loch Doon. Is it on the, yeah. I've not been, no, but yeah, yes, I have heard that's a good one.
Yes, great tea room in Carsfairn. Can definitely vouch for that. That's very true.
We can advise on tea rooms. That's
yes, some of our tea rooms in the Galloway area. Quite a lot of our participants base their archaeological research around the tea rooms, which is much to be advised. Okay, well, I mean, it is late, and I don't want to keep people longer than I need to. So I think I'll just finish by saying thanks so much to Peter and Claire and to Catch for coming in at the end there. Really, really interesting. I always learn so much on these things. And yeah, if it's piqued your interest, then go for it. Just keep in touch through me, and we can get some stuff going, see what we can all find out about the lost wells of the Galloway Glens.